Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the U.S. is collecting DNA from migrant children, and it could follow them for life.
Do we think, really, that a 4-year-old has their DNA associated with some unsolved crime in our database? I don't think so.
So, why is this DNA collection happening, and where could this go next? I'm Manuel Rápalo, and this is The Take.
My name is Stevie Glaberson. I'm the Director of Research and Advocacy at the Center on Privacy and Technology at Georgetown Law, and we work to make it more possible for more people to resist mass surveillance.
Stevie, welcome to The Take. I want to start by setting the scene for our audience a little bit. In Brownsville, Texas, families and children are waiting under a tent to be processed by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. One by one, they're called forward. When it's Fernando's turn, a young man from Mexico, he is greeted by an agent who takes a swab from inside of his cheek. No questions, just a stick in his mouth. And when Fernando asks what it's for, the agent tells him that it's a DNA sample, that he's collecting DNA. Fernando's confused. He's wondering why the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is collecting his DNA. What is the DHS going to do with that collected DNA? And Fernando is just one of millions. Now, Stevie, you co-authored a report that uncovered his story and the broader trends behind it. I'm wondering, what did those records reveal? Where is this DNA going?
Yeah, so Fernando is one of more than 2.6 million people who've had their DNA taken by immigration agents as part of this program. So we are seeing it both at the border, I'll make that clear, and in the interior, both CBP, Customs and Border Protection, which works at the border, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which polices the interior. We've seen them sort of roving through communities recently. Both are empowered to take DNA from any quote unquote non-US persons that they detain. More than 2.6 million people have had their DNA taken under this program. And it's a massive, massive expansion of DNA collection by the federal government.
And where does this DNA go? How long are they able to keep it?
So our understanding, how the program works is DHS, CBP, or ICE agents collect the DNA, like in Fernando's case. They put a swab into someone's mouth and take skin cells, take cheek cells, send those cheek cells, that actual genetic material that contains the person's entire genetic code, to the FBI, and the FBI processes the sample, creates a profile, and adds that profile to CODIS, which is our country's criminal policing DNA database. One thing to note is our understanding, and we've been trying to verify some of these facts with the government, but our understanding is they then keep the cheek cell, the actual genetic material that contains the person's entire genetic code. The government keeps that indefinitely, and they say that's for quality assurance purposes. But that profile that goes into CODIS becomes searchable nationwide by police, criminal police, in future criminal investigations. And our understanding is it's there permanently.
Stevie, there are instances where people don't even realize that their DNA is being collected. They might think that it's actually a COVID test, or maybe they're too afraid to ask questions as well. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Yeah, that's right. We heard from a number of people and from legal advocates that the government is supposed to tell people what they're doing. They're supposed to tell people that they're having their DNA taken. But many, many people did not understand that's what was going on. Many thought it was a COVID test. Some reported that a government agent had explicitly told them it was to check for illness. Others, understood it was a DNA swab, but didn't understand why it was being taken, what would happen to their DNA as a result, what would happen to them as a result. And it's really important to understand that the situation in which these encounters are happening is just an incredibly terrifying and coercive environment for people. For many people who are interacting with immigration agents, really their life is on the line. Deportation for some people is, tantamount to a death sentence. Many people who are being subject to this program and having their DNA taken Many of them are coming to our borders seeking asylum, and that is something that people have a right under law to seek. And what asylum means is that you are coming to the US to say, I need protection. If I'm returned home, I am going to be persecuted and some even killed. So for many people, they are coming to the US, coming to a port of entry, to the place where the US has said, here is where you come if you want to lawfully seek entry into our country. All those people who are coming to our borders, following the rules, doing everything that the government has asked them to do, all of those people, our understanding is they're all considered detained and they're all having their DNA swabbed, in addition to lots and lots of other people.
Yeah. The curious thing about this is that it wasn't always this way. Can we take a step back and can you walk us through how we got to this? Because it really is only in the last 5 or so years that we saw this big expansion in DNA collection.
That's right. So the power to take DNA from non-citizens comes from a law that was passed through Congress with no debate, with no, very little input from civil society, from the populace, and passed into law expanding the US government's ability to collect DNA from non-citizens. 2005, when that law passed, to 2020, about 15 years, the government didn't really do much with that authority because of the way the rules that implemented that statute were written, and because the immigration authorities sort of thought it's not worth it to us, we're not going to do it. DHS only added about 25,000 profiles to CODIS over that 15-year period. Enter the first Trump administration. We all saw how Trump, and see now how Trump sort of trades an anti-immigrant sentiment. And in the first instance of the Trump administration in 2018, they started to pay attention to this authority and to what was happening at DHS, and to start pressuring DHS to scale up an immigration program. At that time, DHS kind of was like, we still kind of don't see the point. It's not really worth it to us. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be difficult. So what they did was take the authority back from DHS, place it in DOJ. They issued a new rule, again, implementing the statute. So Trump administration won, changes the rules in 2020, and that's when we really saw this explode. So we started researching after that, and we saw DNA collection ramp up massively. So, in that first 15 years, DHS adds 25,000 profiles. In 5 years after, we now, as of April 2025, we've seen them add about 2.6 million profiles.
Wow. That's massive. Noting, by the way, that this program expanded further under the Biden administration as well.
And I'll note that based on our projections, it's hard to know what's going to happen under this Trump administration because the way immigration enforcement is being done is changing. But based on the government's own projections, fully 1/3 of this criminal database of CODIS will be populated by 2034 from samples collected from non-citizens, from samples collected by immigration agents. And that's without the protections that are supposed to be in place for DNA to get collected and used in the criminal system.
Okay, so Stevie, you've written that immigration enforcement gives government a kind of shortcut that actually might make it easier to collect DNA from a migrant than it is to collect DNA from someone who's in the criminal legal system. Can you break down why that is?
Yeah, so it's sort of counterintuitive, but immigration enforcement is seen under law as civil. That's in opposition to criminal. And what that means is that civil law is generally considered not to be punitive. It's not about punishment. And often in civil cases, the repercussion for a person is seen as not as serious as like incarceration. I mean, with immigration enforcement, that distinction is really false. I mean, people who are detained under immigration civil charges are often held in the same facilities, in the same jails as people charged with criminal offenses are held sometimes for much, much longer. And so the civil criminal distinction in immigration enforcement is really sort of false to begin with. I'll just say that. But nonetheless, immigration enforcement is seen as civil. And for that reason, the courts haven't given as many protections to people on the receiving end of immigration enforcement. Things like the right to counsel, the right to neutral review of detention decisions, the right, the privilege against self-incrimination, things like that, things that are the hallmarks of the protections of our criminal system. But people in immigration detention, people encountering immigration agents don't have the same level of protections because the immigration system is seen as civil. And so that means that, and we're seeing it all the time today, immigration agents really drove through communities with very little oversight, with very little limits on what they're able to do. And so what this statute, what this set of rules does is it gives those people on the ground the authority to say, this person looks suspicious, this person looks like an immigrant, this person looks like they don't belong here, and I'm going to take their DNA and I'm going to add it to our country's criminal database to be searched in criminal investigations on in perpetuity.
After the break, more with Stevie.
In 1990s Russia, 5 women were enslaved by a serial killer called Alexander Komin. When some of them finally escaped, nobody believed them. We'll investigate this story and others from across the globe on True Crime Reports.
So, Stevie, the Department of Justice has defended the collection of DNA. According to Wired, the DOJ called it essential, not just for identifying migrants who may have committed crimes in the past, but potentially for solving crimes they might commit in the future. Obviously, this raises some pretty big questions. What does it mean for the government to be collecting DNA, not based on what someone has done, but what they might do in the future?
Well, plain and simple, it means the program is unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court in 2013 sort of made the last big pronouncement about government-compelled DNA collection that we have so far. The courts have not addressed the question of compelled collection in the immigration context, I'll note. But in 2013, the Supreme Court, in a case called Maryland versus King, did look at Maryland's statute that allows Maryland's criminal police to take DNA from people who are arrested or convicted of certain crimes. The court in that case said it was okay in certain cases for state governments to compel people who are arrested or convicted of certain crimes to give over their DNA. But it was pretty specific about why it's okay. Because we have in the US, we have the Fourth Amendment, which is supposed to protect people from unreasonable searches and seizures. And compelled DNA collection is unquestionably a search and or a seizure. Both the taking of the DNA from your mouth, but also potentially a number of the steps down the line, the creation of the profile, adding it to CODIS, searching against CODIS. So the Supreme Court addressed whether it's reasonable for the government to do a search like that. And it said in certain situations it is, but not for crime solving, not for future crime solving. The reason the Supreme Court said it was okay in that case was because Maryland offered a different justification. The justification Maryland offered was that it needed the DNA to identify people in its custody. Now, that rationale doesn't really pass the sniff test, but the important thing for the purpose of this question is it did not say that using DNA, compelling someone to give over their DNA because you have a speculative suspicion that they might be involved in criminal activity in the future, that is not a reason under our Constitution to permit a search. We've never permitted government actors to do this kind of search based on no suspicion whatsoever. And that's what's happening here.
And one of the more interesting things that I read in this report is that this is being done to people as young as 4 years old that are getting their DNA collected.
I think it's hard to conceive of the kind of numbers we're talking about, 2.6 million people. But if you think about one 4-year-old, the absurdity of this program and its real intentions, the fact that we know that the government has taken the DNA of a 4-year-old child and added it to our country's criminal policing database, it really brings all of that into sharp relief. So adding a 4-year-old's DNA to CODIS, to the country's criminal policing database, is not about learning anything about that 4-year-old today that will help immigration agents decide whether he or she should be able to enter the country. That's what they claim this program is about. We need to identify the people before us. We need to know whether they've committed crimes in the past that, we need to solve and should help us decide whether we're going to let them in. Do we think, really, that a 4-year-old has their DNA associated with some unsolved crime in our database? I don't think so. It boggles the mind. So that case shows what this is really about. It's about having that child's DNA on file for the future. It's about watching this person as she or he grows. And it's about being able to find him or her in the future. It's not immigration enforcement. It's genetic surveillance.
And Stevie, I know that you and your team have actually joined a lawsuit pushing for more transparency on this subject. What don't we know about this program, and what are you hoping to uncover?
So the more we learn about the program, the more questions we have. The government has really not been forthcoming about what it's doing, why it's doing it, or what it's planning to do in the future. So we are part of a lawsuit with the Amicus Center and Americans for Immigrant Justice, where we're suing on a Freedom of Information Act request that the government has failed to respond to. We're asking for things like basic information about where collection is happening, where and how people's DNA is stored and handled, who can access it and for what, and who's been affected. We got a little bit through our FOIA request. We got a little bit of information. That's how we found out about the 4-year-old and a 93-year-old. But other than that, the government has provided nothing. We're also looking for things like how DHS is using the DNA now. They claim it's for immigration enforcement. Is it? Are they using it that way? And how? And how do they plan to use it in the future? How often is DNA taken by DHS without judicial authorization, without any of these protections that I've described, being used in criminal investigations and prosecutions? Do the agents that are tasked with taking DNA, do they receive any training or supervision? Is anyone checking what they're doing? And if so, how? And finally, is there any way for a person to get their DNA expunged, to get it removed from the system? We've been trying to find that out now for a long time. Is there any way, once your DNA is in this system, to get it taken out? There should be. We cannot find any process, any procedure, any evidence that there is, if you wanted to get your DNA taken out of the system, that there's a way to do so.
And Stevie, you and your colleagues are not the only ones who are pushing for more transparency on this. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden is also pressing the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice here in the United States for answers. He wrote an open letter to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. What is he asking for, and what do you think can be done?
He's asking for a lot of the same things we are asking for. He's also, he's interested in what DHS's real interest in DNA is. What are the guardrails around DNA use at DHS? How many people, adults and children, have been affected? How the agency is making decisions and who gets to make those decisions about who to collect DNA from. So he's asking a lot of the same questions that we're asking. And in terms of what can be done, so when we published our report in 2024, Biden was still in office, and we were hopeful that people would pay attention and that Congress or the president would act to stop this abuse. That didn't happen. And I don't think we have any realistic hope that this administration will actually put a stop to this. But there's still really important work that needs to happen. I think programs like this and many other things that are happening on our soil, we're moving more and more towards authoritarianism, towards the kind of tyranny that our Constitution was written to try to avoid. And really, it takes people noticing, it takes people understanding, and it takes people standing up to stop it.
We've seen in the past that surveillance tools often start at the margins. They're used on immigrants, they're used on protesters and other vulnerable groups, and then they're quietly expanded. Is there reason to think that the kind of DNA collection that we are seeing at the border will move beyond the border? And if so, what would that look like?
I mean, it's already happening, not just at the border. This is not just happening at the border. It is happening in the interior, and we have every reason to believe it may be happening to U.S. citizens. But to your broader point, we know that what gets normalized, what we get used to with respect to marginalized communities, immigrant communities, will spread to affect everyone. You know, David Cole, who used to be the legal director of the ACLU, has said, what we are willing to allow our government to do to immigrants creates precedents for how it treats its citizens. But also, just more immediately, if you think you're safe now, think again. This is already affecting your community, and right now, everyone is at risk because there are no checks, no meaningful checks on the power that immigration agents are wielding. This could happen to anyone at any time.
And Stevie, you're warning over the potential negative spiral that comes with genetic surveillance. What is the solution to scale this back and prevent the sort of scenario that you're warning against?
Yeah, so ultimately, this program is a creature of law. It was created by law and regulation, and it can be stopped that same way. But we need the people in power to want to do that. And that's why elections really matter. And coming together as community really matters. Real change in this and many other things is only going to be possible if we come together as people and reject the logics and the demagoguery that make programs like this appealing and possible.
We'll have to leave it at that. Stevie Glaberson, thank you so much for joining us today on The Take.
Thanks for having me.
And that's The Take. If you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. That's where you'll find all of our recent content updated regularly so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. See you tomorrow.